and share in this worship assembly. Kirk is up and to go up there and sing. He could let me preach here, so pretty good deal. So that's what he's doing. You know, he loves to sing. He'll tell you that. I don't think he'd rather sing than preach, but he definitely loves to lead singing. And he's expressed that to me many, many times. Tonight I want to speak to you out of the Sermon on the Mount. I thought this would be a great place to land for us tonight. Chapter 6, verses 19 and following. It's on laying up your treasures in heaven. And I've entitled this sermon, Laying Up Your Heart in Heaven. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And may God bless the reading and the hearing and the doing of his divine word. Amen. I don't know if you've ever seen the series on CNBC about strange inheritance. Now, there's always some interesting inheritance that people come by. It could be a car. It could be an heirloom from the family, or even some very interesting items from one of the wars, or something that some famous person might have had. It's always interesting. I very often catch it on Sirius radio and listen to it. But fascinating. Today I had an opportunity to reminisce just a little bit. One of the things I'm involved in is the Historical Society of Nansen County. And of course, I've told you before that our family goes back into the 1750s in Nansen County, and they have a website called Old Anson. And I was on there just piddling, just reading some of the comments. Then all of a sudden, I saw someone post there, are any of you related to the Henson family, to the Bennett family, and on they would go. And I said, well, I'm related to this one, and this one, and this one. And we started conversing and talking through this, and come to find out, this, I didn't know who she was or anything, and she happened to be an African-American lady. I've got other cousins that are black, and it's not a strange thing to me. And so I started talking to her, and she, did you know the Clark family? I said, yes, Christopher Clark, the one that she referred to. She gave basically a will of Christopher Clark. Christopher Clark lived from about 1740s up to about 1790. He was born in Louisa County, Virginia, moved down to Anson County with his family, and many others from that whole clan were down there. And she showed this whole will. And she started talking about this will, and I said, yes, he's my fifth grandfather, or something like that, yeah. Great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And she, the other people, she mentioned the Streeter family, and I said, yes, Edward Streeter is my fourth grandfather, going backwards. And Edward, then she started talking about one of his descendants, and I said, yes, I descend from Penelope, his daughter, and her family came through the brother, William. And it was kind of interesting, but then I just got to, all of a sudden I realized I was talking to someone of a different race, and I wasn't talking to a white person like myself. And I started, well, does that mean that my grandfather, in the will, basically she said, Matthew, and I think his name was Thomas, they were set free. They were given over to son Joseph, and eventually they were being set free. But she talked about them being released, and I thought to myself, well, Christopher was a Quaker, and it was about that time that they started releasing their slaves. They started giving, this was the late 1700s, the Quakers were anti-slavery during those times. And then I said, I'm kind of confused. Did you mean to say that Christopher set your people free? She said, no, they were indentured service. And maybe you know that terminology. It was, they were basically decided, people that wanted to basically sell themselves to a farmer or a craftsman in order to pay off some debt. And basically, that's what these men were doing. And I started thinking, I spent about half the afternoon talking to this lady. It was fascinating just to go through all this. But if you go back into some of those old wills, you start thinking about, now these are the cherished items of these individuals to pass on to their sons and daughters. Christopher mentioned not only these young men, but also mentioned land and other things. I've read other wills that they were giving a cow, or they were giving maybe a feather pillow or a mattress. And I saw that quite often. A mattress must have been a high value item. I know it probably took them a long time to make those mattresses, feathered mattresses. As a boy, I slept on one of those. I don't know who did that, but it was a lot of fun, just sleeping on those feather mattresses. But people tend to value certain things in this life, and they value them so much that they want to pass them down. Sometimes those who inherit those items do not necessarily appreciate exactly the thing that loved one passed on, right? They don't appreciate that stamp collection quite like maybe you did. Or they don't appreciate maybe that prized piece of land that as soon as you're gone, your progeny then sells it, right? And so they don't appreciate these things. Jesus, in teaching about this life, talks about laying up treasures in heaven. Obviously, a treasure is something of great value, something that's very important to you, something that you spend a lot of your time thinking about, a lot of your time developing and living out in your life. You know, some people, they just spend their whole life developing a certain career or an item. Some people just love cars. On that show, a guy had... I guess it was like a 1967 Corvette. Now, I want you to think about this. Some of you may appreciate that, some of you don't. It was in pristine condition, about 20-something thousand miles on it. Okay? That's about it. Pristine condition. He came out of the Vietnam War. He had bought that vet. And now his adopted son had this vet, and he was selling it. Well, if he was alive, he probably had a heart attack. That was his baby. Jesus knew about people. He was not a stranger to people loving things of this world, being consumed and living out the purposes of a life with something that they within the heart thought it was important. And Jesus captures this sentiment in this reading tonight, saying, if you want to look ahead, if you want to lay up some type of treasure, it's not things of this world, where moth and rust consume. Now, I've had holes in my suits from time to time in my life because of those little moths. I could not stand to think about maybe those mothballs in my house. They stink. I can handle holes in my suits more than I could handle those moths. I can still smell them. You go to my grandma's house or somebody, I still smell these mothballs. I can handle that. But moths go in and they destroy. Jesus knew that. Rust, it has a way of consuming metal, and after a while, it just crumbles. That's the way life is. All of us know that. It's like everybody knows that people die. Though at the same time, they think everybody else dies, but not me. Everybody else should be concerned about their relationship with God, but not me. Other people may suffer in this world because they make certain decisions in their life. They have problems, but if I do it, it won't bother me. Young people are bad about this as well as older people. Young people think that they're invincible. They're superwoman and superman, and they go out there, I can go do this or I do that, and it's not going to bother me. Some of us have lived a little bit longer and know that when people do that kind of stuff, that their lives are changed and not for the good. You know how I feel about strong drink. I speak about it very often, just talking in general with people. If you've been around me, I don't think it's a harmless thing. I was just thinking about one of my cousins, distant cousins. I can still remember him. His name was Dick Clark, and he wasn't American Bandstand either. And my dad had a way of telling me about Dick. Dick, I'd see him around. He was a painter. You know why he was a painter? That was a job that he can do and still be a drunk. He was one of the town drunks. And so I took that lesson very early, and I can tell you many other people that saw some of the same things that did not learn that lesson, that, oh Lord, I wish that they would have listened, that they would not have mocked me and mocked others that told them and warned them that to live this kind of life, to do this type of thing, will end you up in deep trouble. Jesus wanted them to know that to lay up treasures in heaven is better than to be consumed by the things of this world. And so you might be thinking tonight, what is it about laying up treasure? What is he talking about? And it's not necessarily that clear from the context. One might understand it as being money from verse 24. And I'm sure that's part of it, where Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. You either love the one and hate the other, or you cannot serve two masters. You've got to love one or the other. Serve God. But as you look in the teachings of Jesus, even from this context, there are other things that could be included in that whole mix of things that are laid up as treasures in heaven. We've got to understand that treasure is something that is of great value to a person. It's something that gives them meaning and purpose in life. You know that when you become a child of God, you lay your life on the altar of God and say, Lord, I give you my life as a sacrifice unto your kingdom. Just giving your life, the things that you think about, the things that you are, the things that you value, you give them over to the Lord. You're laying up your life in heaven. People are real busy these days trying to put forward their best foot, trying to build a career, trying to make other people think that they're something when they're just like everybody else. Jesus said you can be like the Pharisees, you can be like Herod, you can be like Pilate, you can be like Caesar himself, but when you stand before your Father, the one that you need to be concerned about is whether you have become like Jesus. When you lay up your life in heaven, the things that you are, things that you're dedicated to, you are glorifying and worshiping God in that. I try to encourage people that worship is not just what we do on Sunday morning or Sunday night or when we come to the church building. Our lives are worshiping the Lord. Everything that we're about is for the Lord. Think about this. When you get married, your marriage is a gift to the Lord. You lay that marriage up in heaven. You give that marriage over to the Lord. It belongs to the Lord. When that child comes to your home, you give that child as a gift to God. You're laying up treasures in heaven. You're saying, Lord, this belongs to you. Give me the strength, give me the grace to be able to be faithful in laying this up for you. It belongs to you, Lord. When I look at this passage, it says here that there's a problem with light and there's a problem with darkness. When we think about our treasures, he's indicating here that treasure does not come from darkness. It actually comes from the light. Verse 22 again, the eye is the lamp of the body, so if the eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. What is this treasure? This treasure is when we allow the light to flow into our lives, to allow God's goodness and God's mercy to flow in our lives. When we're joined in unity with Christ, we will produce much fruit. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you abide in me, says Jesus in John chapter 15, you will produce much fruit. I'm not the greatest farmer in the world, but I know enough about it. Okay? I know about it enough about it that when you put seed into the ground and you water it, that it will pop through the ground. The fruit will. I know that much. I know that if you, like my puppy did today, I put down some asparagus crowns, and my puppy knew where I planted them. And Molly went and pulled one of them up. And it's hard to tell a little puppy, you know, they don't grow very well pulled up. Out of our hearts that are full of light, It will be a natural thing, just like that crown when it's in the ground. It will eventually produce fruit. Those spears will pop out of the ground, and you will have something wonderful to eat. So it is when the Spirit of God is in our hearts, when God's light shines in our hearts and our lives, we don't need to be thinking all the time, well, now what would be that treasure that I'm going to lay up? Now, I just wonder, can you go to the elders? Elders, do you know what I can lay up in heaven? Darrell was preaching about laying up treasures in heaven. Could you give me insight, maybe give me an idea of what I should lay up in heaven? Listen to me. More importantly, listen to Jesus. When the light of God shines into your heart, it will be, now listen, automatic. You don't have to think about all these things, because when the Spirit of God is within you, when the light of God is within you, all of a sudden, as I understand this text, that the fruit of the Spirit will start being produced in your life. It's not so much engaging this as it is engaging this, and allow God to shape it by His powerful Spirit. And it's laid out in your life, all of a sudden starts producing this fruit. Isn't it wonderful to see a new Christian start growing in their faith? How do you know they're growing in their faith? Because you start seeing much fruit. You start seeing them growing, putting away evil in their life, going towards the cross, attending church, doing those things that are a blessing to other people. And years later, you see that same person that came to the Lord back when become a leader in the church, and you say, praise God. You're not saying then, oh, he was just so smart. Oh, she was so bright. No, you're saying how wonderful God is. I remember, but now I know that God is able to do above and beyond anything I can think or imagine. Look how wonderful God is. How great our God is. When I read this text and I see about laying up treasures in heaven, I'm reminded of the story of David. In 2 Samuel, if you would please turn to 2 Samuel chapter 24. Starting at verse 15. It's a wonderful story, but it's also a tragic story in that David sinned against God. It's not strange that David, a man after God's own heart, from time to time sinned against God. Here he will count the people of Israel. Starting at verse 15, he says, "So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel, and from morning until the appointed time, and there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba 70,000 men. Because of David's sin, many lost their lives. And when the angel stretched out his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented and the calamity and said to the angel, who was working destruction among the people, it is enough. Now stay your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking the people and said, behold, I have sinned and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house. And Gad came that day to David and said to him, go up, raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David went up at Gad's word as the Lord commanded, And when Araunah looked down, he saw the king and his servants coming on towards him. And Araunah said, "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" David said, "To buy the threshing floor from you, in order to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be averted from the people." Then Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take and offer up what seems good to him. Here are the oxen for the burnt offering, and the threshing sledges, and the yokes of the oxen for the wood. All this, O King Araunah, gives to the king." And Araunah said to the king, "May the Lord your God accept you." But the king said to Araunah, "No, but I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord responded to the plea for the land, and the plague was averted from Israel. What I want you to hear here from this text is that you have a man that was grieving about his sin. That is David the king, a man of great authority, a man of great ability, a man of great wealth, but yet he sinned against God, and he wanted to make a sacrifice unto the Lord because he saw other people suffering because of his sin. And Araunah said, "What I'll do, king, I'll give you this oxen, I'll give you the threshing floor, I'll give you whatever you need. Go ahead and sacrifice." And David said, "No way. I will not offer anything that doesn't cost me something." I know this story is way over in the book of Samuel, but in the Sermon on the Mount, we also have this same type sentiment of the Lord wanting us to give from the heart. He wants us to give sacrifice unto him that cost us something. Now, the Pharisees, they seemed to want to offer things that really didn't cost them a whole lot. They did things for show. They would fast, but they would do it just for show. They would give, but they would do so for show, making sure everybody would see them do it so they can brag about how good and holy they were. But David had to learn a lesson here, and he really believed it in his heart that he would not offer anything that would not cost him something before the Lord. And so when we think about today of laying up treasures in heaven, the real question I think out of this text and from 2 Samuel, what do you love so much that it will cost you dearly to give it to the Lord? You remember the widow who gave the mites, the 2 mites at the temple? She gave all that she had. Other people gave much more than these 2 little mites, but they gave out of their abundance. She gave all that she had to the Lord. That's amazing how the Lord at times used situations like that to teach us something valuable. When we're laying up treasures in heaven, the question for us really is, if we're going to lay up treasures in heaven, they need to be things of great value to us, that we cherish, that will cost us something to give to the Lord. Try this, guys, and see what the results would be. We just went through Valentine's Day, and I hope you got your beloved something nice. But just for argument's sake, what if you decided to pick up something on the way home for your wife for Valentine's Day? And I mean literally pick up something. On the way, you saw some discarded piece of trash or flower on the side of the road, and you say, "Oh, she likes flowers." And you stop, screeching halt, and you got out feeling all proud, and you picked that up and you took it to your wife. What would she say to you? She might not say anything to you for months. Okay? What I'm saying here is something real. I mean, people, they know exactly what I'm talking about. You would not dare do that. Why? It's simple enough, but it's a great illustration to say, because you value and love your wife, you know her feelings are precious to you. You would not want to forget that and present something that's less than honoring of her. And so when we think about laying up treasures into heaven in eternity, what is it that we're trying to do? We need to offer up to the Lord things that cause us effort in our lives. And that ought to be obvious. That it costs us time, things that we think are important, doing those things that are out of our comfort zones. Have you ever heard someone say, "I can't do that for the Lord because I just don't feel comfortable doing that"? Or that would, if I gave this money to the church, I'd have to give up my cable. Or I'd have to give up this, or I won't have enough to buy this car or that car. And, and after a while you wonder, do you have eye problems? Because the whole discussion is about you. Laying up for treasures in heaven means that we are looking and saying, "Lord, this may cost me something, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Lord. I want to honor you. I want to glorify your name. I want to give you praise." I want you to think about this final one. I've alluded to this in our sermon this evening when I talked about the Pharisees. They were so concerned with self. They were so caught up in image that they would give things, but they never gave their hearts to God. It's easy at times to give things. Sometimes. Especially if we give out of our abundance. Don't matter, I'll just give this thing. And then go and do what we want to do. One of the big problems with the Israelites, they didn't mind worshiping God. That was not the problem. They would go worship God. The problem was they would run down to the temple and worship God. They would go up on the high place and worship Baal. They would worship the Asherah. They would find out other gods, and more gods the better. That's the problem. They seen one God's enough, two gods are better, three are great, four, we just add to the party. You know what the Lord would have of us when we're laying up these treasures in heaven is that we have pure hearts. We've talked about the Spirit changing our lives. We talked about really giving gifts unto the Lord that cost us something. But bottom line, we have to give God from a pure heart. not out of hypocrisy, not out of self-gain, but saying unto the Lord, I give these things unto you because I love you. Really, brothers and sisters, this evening, what God would have of us, what God really wants. See, God has all the money He needs. He doesn't need our money. God really doesn't need a lot of things that we can think of. God doesn't need your 67 Corvette. God doesn't need your house. You know what God desires? He desires your heart. The same thing that David gave unto the Lord is what the Lord desires for us to give. To truly say, Lord, I give my heart. I give my heart because your Spirit dwells in me. I give my heart because of the purity that you have poured out into my heart. I give you my heart because I love you. I love you. We need to be careful how we present the gospel to people. And I say that in this way, is that when we're talking to people about Jesus, that we remember that He is the greatest expression of God's love that's ever been given to mankind. That He is the ultimate expression of God that man has ever encountered. We're talking about people receiving the Lord Jesus Christ, who is a great expression of God's divine love. When we talk about Him, we should never turn Him into point 1, point 2, point 3. Here's this doctrine over here that other people disagree with. Point 5, this, that. When we invite people to the Lord to offer their lives upon the altar of God, we are setting them up to know what it means to lay up treasures in heaven. What are we teaching them to do when we do that? Are we saying unto them, if you get everything just right, then maybe you can lay up treasures in heaven? Let me be honest with you. That has way more to do with Phariseeism than with Jesus Christ. When we do that kind of stuff, we set them up for failure. When we teach them that they accept the Lord who loved them and gave His life, that without Jesus in their life, there's nothing that they're able to do to have a relationship with God. We're teaching them how wonderful God is. We're teaching them how great God is. It's not about us. It's not about the church. It's about Christ. The gospel is about Christ. It's about what He has done, what He has accomplished, what He will do. Why should we lay up treasures in heaven? Because Jesus told us to? Yes. But because as they go to the presence of God, they go into the Son of God and to the glory of God. The old saying, you cannot take it with you. You can't. The things of this world, it will decay. It will be passing away. But those things that we lay up in heaven, that we give as a sacrifice on the altar of God, they will be eternal. And maybe one day, though we may not understand it here, we may be able to look back at those days like today. And so I didn't understand how piddling all those things were. How really they were not that important. And we'll be able to see that mansion that the Lord has given unto us. Maybe then we'll understand what we've been talking tonight when we see those treasures at the foot of the throne of the Lamb. And they will last forever. I can't tell you everything about that. That's really not the intent tonight. But I'm calling you, the gospel is calling you to lay down your life, to give your heart unto the Lord, and to lay up treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust corrupt. Jesus is calling tonight. He's asking you to take up his cross and follow after him, to live your life for him. Jesus told his disciples and others that were following, if you don't put me first, you cannot be my disciples. If you don't love me more than father or mother or child or wife or a husband, you cannot be my disciple. Jesus, you're extreme. Why would you say something like that? Don't you know that I love my wife, my children? Oh, he knows. Oh, he understands. But what he's saying to us, brothers and sisters, tonight, it's about your heart. Let your treasure be your heart. And when it's your heart, you will glorify Christ throughout eternity. If we can help you in any way, if you've never been baptized into the watery grave of baptism, receiving the blood of Jesus Christ, you can do that tonight. Or maybe you just need prayers of the church, which very often we just need some strength from brothers and sisters. We give you this opportunity as we stand and sing.